In order to truly understand women, you need to come at them from 3 different angles. If you fail to understand each of these thoroughly, or if you miss one or fail to appreciate its importance, then your knowledge of women is going to be incomplete and your interactions and relationships with them are going to suffer. The 3 things I'm talking about are 1, biology, 2, culture, and 3, psychology. Let's talk about biology first because it's so easy to misunderstand this one or fail to appreciate its importance. Imagine asking a fish what it's like to live in water. The fish would fail to appreciate the significance of the question, what do you mean living in water? Because water is such a fundamental part of its existence that it barely takes notice of it. In the same way, us humans, we have difficulty appreciating just how fundamentally important our biology is to our unique experience of existence because it's too essential to who we are. But why do you sleep? Why do you get hungry? Why do you get thirsty? Why are you constantly having sexual feelings? And for that matter, why are you sexually attracted to humans as opposed to rocks or trees? The basic building blocks of who you are, why you're having the specific experience that you're having, is because of biology. You are a human. You are having a human experience. It's coded into your brain, into the very cells of your body. Now, this is a channel and a video about understanding women, so let's get into that. Understand that the overwhelming majority of your biological drives are not gender specific. Both men and women like the taste of sugar. Both men and women prefer not to feel pain. They get scared when they see snakes or spiders or when they're at the top of a skyscraper looking down. Both men and women delight when they see a rainbow because these are not gender-specific experiences, they're just human experiences. Another way of saying this is that overwhelmingly, as a human man, you have more in common with a human woman than you do the male of a completely different species. As a human man, your experience is a lot more similar to a human female than it is a male penguin or a male rhino or a male praying mantis, whatever it is. The species that you are is the most important part of your biology, not your gender. I know that this may seem obvious, but we're just starting slow. We're building to something here. Now, I'm not saying that human men and women are identical biologically. They are not. They are different, and those differences are really important. I don't want to get too technical, but human beings as a species are what's called sexually dimorphic, which means that our genders present differently. We have different appearances, we have different behaviors, instincts, we have different sexual organs. So think of it like this, okay? So this is human biology, and the vast majority of it, men and women, exactly the same. But that last little part up here, that's different. This is where we deviate based on gender. Men have their own biology and women have their own set of unique instincts. Maybe you've heard of this data. Jordan Peterson used to reference this. It was research done in Scandinavian countries, which are well known for their progressive social attitudes, trying to disrupt gender norms. But when they actually looked at the preferred occupation of men and women, they found that overwhelmingly men were choosing careers that were object-driven, things like engineering, that's based on maths and logic, and women were more drawn to caring professions, things like nursing. The reason that data is significant is because socially and culturally that really shouldn't have been the case because they've been working hard to reverse those gender norms, but you can't overcome the biology of gender. Evolution has shaped male and female instincts in a very specific way. Over countless generations, it has incentivized a talent and an aptitude in certain tasks. Men who are good at building things, at finding and manipulating objects and using them as tools for survival were more likely to survive and were therefore more desirable as mating partners. And so women would shack up with those kind of men who had those talents. And then, of course, over time, evolution reinforces this through gene selection. Women who have personality traits of kindness and nurturing, they're going to be good mothers, and good mothers are more likely to ensure their children survive and pass on those genes to the next generation. And of course, men are specifically attracted to women who are kind and nurturing, the ones that are going to make good mothers. And so again, evolution through sexual selection reinforces this. And so you can see over countless generations how evolution has incentivized men to be one particular way and women to be another way. You see it also with sexual selection. There's a reason why women are attracted to men with big muscles who are really tall and strong because they're counting on those men to, protect them and to keep the children safe. Whereas it's not as important for men to have, muscly partners. Evolution didn't reinforce that. Where men are really interested in is young, healthy, fertile women. And you see this with age preference. Like, men are very interested in younger women because women have that limited fertility window where she can bear healthy children, whereas women are a lot more tolerant of older men because men are older and, they're more fertile into their older age. Even in their 60s and 70s, men can still produce viable sperm, and so women can be more tolerant. And so you see, evolution takes all of this into account, and then it reinforces certain behaviors based on the biological benefits that it brings about. Men who had genes that told them to be sexually attracted to 80-year-old women were quickly bred out of the gene pool because it just wasn't good for the species. Evolution doesn't tolerate that kind of thing. Of course, you do see individual exceptions, but taken as a whole, men and women across the world are biologically the same. If anybody hasn't seen it, I recommend watching my video, Proof Women Will Never Change, because that goes through the results of a massive sociological study. They got data from 36 different countries, thousands, tens of thousands of different people. And what it showed was that essentially it doesn't matter what culture you're in, biologically, people have the same preferences. So many of the questions that we have about what women are looking for in men, what their dating preferences are, can be found actually coded into their biology. Doesn't matter what culture they're from, biologically, women are the same. This is why I do so many videos on this channel covering studies in evolutionary biology and evolutionary psychology, because it's important to know what the baseline is. What are the basic building blocks of female preference and female sexuality? Once you have that thorough understanding of the biology, you can then move on to the second part, which is culture. Okay, so we know that women in Saudi Arabia are going to act differently to women in France, or a Christian woman from Kentucky in the United States is going to act different to an atheist woman from Portland. You can't explain those differences biologically because at a biological level, these women are the same. You have to look to culture, and culture is always shifting, and it impacts how women behave. It impacts how they think. Women today, like right now in 2021, they're different to how women were 50 years ago. And those women were different to women 100 years ago, who were different to women 1,000 years ago, and then 10,000 years ago, and yes, 100,000 years ago. The culture shifts and women do change along with it. You can think of biology as the hardware and culture as the software. And every now and then there's this new software update, right, that gets released, or these new social attitudes that everybody adopts. And just like the software, updates from Facebook or Amazon or whatever, nobody really reads the fine print. They don't know what they're signing up to and the dangers and implications and consequences until it's too late. But the impact of culture on women can be massive. And what's really weird about the time that we're living in right now is that the culture is shifting so quickly. It's absolutely nuts. Right now, I want to show you some data from my video. You won't believe what these graphs reveal about women. If you haven't seen that yet, I put a link down below. Check it out. All right, here you can see for young women aged around 18 to 25, back in the 70s, only 20% of the female population was willing to have sex without being in love. But if you look how it is in modern day, that figure has gone up by 4 times. It's now 80%. And that's because the culture used to be a lot more conservative, whereas now it's a lot more progressive. There's that emphasis on individual expression, freedom, short-term pleasure. From 20% to 80%, that is absolutely massive, but that is how culture can shift. And look how much women have shifted their attitudes just based on cultural changes. I hope you see the significance in what I'm saying. Women's biology did not change in those 50 years, just the culture. If you haven't seen that video yet, the one with the graphs, I highly recommend it. It's absolutely eye-opening. The YouTuber Wheat Waffles, who's that guy that I did that long interview with, if you haven't seen that, I'll put a link down below, fantastic discussion. But he made a really interesting point, which is that looks for men, like whether you're an attractive man, is a lot more important now than it used to be. Like 20 years ago, it perhaps wasn't as important. But with the rise of things like dating apps, Tinder, which are all about superficial first impressions, it's now absolutely essential to be a really good-looking guy. And that's an example of a massive cultural shift brought about by technology, and that's changing how women act and respond in the dating market. So you need to pay attention to the world around you, track the culture, track especially attitudes about women and dating preferences and what the social attitudes about gender and masculinity and femininity are. When you're interacting with a woman from any culture, you've got to be aware of the social context that she grew up in, because women are highly responsive to culture. Evolution has crafted them to pay attention to the world around them. Social conformity was essential to a woman's survival. And so don't be surprised if you see deeply implanted in the female psyche cultural attitudes. But there is a flip side to that. And before we move on, I just want to mention 2 words of caution about culture, which is the first, that although culture is really important, Still, I would argue that it really only goes so deep. Perhaps you've had this experience, but you'll notice in the world that women will often speak as though their personal attitudes and beliefs are perfectly in alignment with the social attitudes of the time. But even though she talks the talk, when it comes to her actions, they don't necessarily match up. For example, when you ask a woman what kind of men she likes to date, she might say that she likes really feminine, sensitive men who are really sweet and kind. She says that because culturally she wants to fit in. She wants to be a good feminist ally. She wants to pay lip service to that idea that traditional masculinity is toxic and patriarchal. However, despite what she says, when she's actually presented with one of these nice, agreeable men who wants to date her, she finds him boring. She finds him uninteresting. She finds him weak. And so she goes off and she sleeps with egotistical, macho, masculine guy because at a biological level, that's what she finds attractive. That's actually quite common. Women saying that they want what's culturally approved of, but then acting purely out of their biology, which is why I offer that word of caution. Pay attention to culture, yes, but don't exaggerate its importance. It only goes so deep. It requires really, really intense, prolonged brainwashing to completely wipe out the fundamental messaging of a woman's biology. Another word of caution about culture, because this problem is becoming increasingly common. You find men who have a cultural or a political agenda are increasingly interested in talking about women and talking about dating. Now, at first, this seems like a totally strange alliance. The world of politics seems so far removed from the intimacy and individuality of someone's dating life, but there are men who are very skillful at linking these two. It's a matter of taking the pain and the frustration and the loneliness felt by single men who are frustrated not being able to get a girlfriend, and then convincing them that their suffering is because of cultural changes and that the pain they're experiencing in their personal lives would not be there if the culture shifted, if they were to support some social cause or support some political party or movement. The reason that I advise caution is because it's highly possible to attribute too much significance to culture. It is important, and I'll often talk about like radical feminism or other cultural movements if I feel like it's relevant, but the thing is that often it's just not. The way that some men present things is that if the culture was different, then everything would be perfect. We'd be living in Eden. We'd be living in paradise. And that's just not true. We would still have misunderstandings between men and women based on individual psychological differences and, of course, just the basic biological deviations between our genders. So I just wanted to quickly mention this. If you're listening to dating advice, just check in. Are you actually listening to genuine dating advice, or is it just a cleverly disguised recruitment tool for a cultural or political agenda? Total transparency for me, I am not a political person. I just don't find politics very interesting. So this channel is apolitical. If you're conservative or progressive, you're religious or atheist, I think you can learn something here. I know that it sucks and it's regrettably rare to actually find things that are not caught up in the culture war or in politics these days, but honestly, I do want this space to remain free from that. My only aim is to just help you understand women better and so you can get into relationships. I'm not secretly trying to recruit you for any cause. I think it probably means that this channel is never going to be super popular because I think it's political commentary and like the culture war that really drives big views at the moment, because people are getting so into that us versus them narrative. That's what drives their emotions. And here's this channel, which is about mutual understanding and cooperation. And unfortunately, that's just not as popular, I don't think. It's harder to sell, but look, that's one of the reasons I'm so grateful to have my Patreon community. Big shout out to you guys, because your financial support means that I can really cover topics that I think are important. I don't have to constantly be chasing the views. I think that staying out of the culture war probably also gives me some additional credibility. Like when somebody really wants dating advice, for their own personal situation, they know they can hit me up on Hey Hero, they can ask their questions, they can tell me their story, and I'll give advice that's purely based on them. There's no social agenda hiding behind it. We got a bit off topic there. Anyway, let's move on to the final one. We've covered biology, we've covered culture. Let's get on to individual psychology. Now, this one is less about understanding women and more about your capacity to understand a woman. A lot of psychology is not about gender. It's about the specific beliefs and experiences had by an individual. Occasionally I see comments in the comments section from men saying things like, women live life on easy mode, or women never struggle the same way that men do. I find that really sad because those people can't see past the group identity. They can't see past the gender to actually empathize with an individual. The truth is that there are existential pains and suffering that are experienced by every human being, regardless of gender. And while I won't disagree that there are certain areas where women have it a whole lot easier than men do, to deny that women have their own unique set of struggles, or to close off your ability to empathize with an individual woman and the suffering that she, as an individual, is going through, that's really sad. I understand why culture can be very divisive, but I actually think that in individual psychology is actually the place where we can bond and find mutual understanding because of how universal our experience is. I would actually probably place individual psychology as the most important of the three. If you want a thorough understanding of the woman in front of you, then you need to know psychology. If you're on a date with a woman and you think that understanding her biology and her culture is enough for you to go on, that you have a full picture of her without knowing anything about her individual psychology, then you're totally delusional. I mean, hopefully you have noticed the massive variation in personality types between women who have the same biology and who live in the same culture. Why is one woman kind and sweet? Why is another woman loud and adventurous? Why is this other woman toxic and abusive? Why does one woman only date athletes and bodybuilders, and another woman only dates musicians, and another woman only dates men who remind her of her father? The differences here can only be explained by individual psychology. How were they brought up by their parents? What values were instilled in them? What things were they rewarded for? What things were they punished for? What were the formative experiences that created their personality? Now, admittedly, there is some exciting research being done about possible genetic determinants of personality, and we're going to watch that space with great interest, but make no mistake about it, it is environmental influences that largely shape our personality. The people who raise us, the kind of relationships we have while growing up, that has a huge influence on the kind of people that we end up becoming. I recommend people watch the Netflix movie 3 Identical Strangers, because that's a story of triplets who are separated at birth and raised in very different, social conditions, very different households. And it's interesting to see that identical DNA has similarities in some areas, but different social upbringings really deviates in other areas. Check out that movie. But I would encourage every person out there who is sincere about wanting to understand women, I would say that it's absolutely essential that you have a comprehensive knowledge of basic psychology. I don't think that this is a luxury. I think that knowing this stuff is a basic necessity if you want to have healthy relationships with people. What does a healthy attachment in childhood look like? What are the important emotional developmental milestones that every child should pass through? And how can you tell if an adult didn't have those experiences growing up? How do you recognize trauma in adults? And what are some common coping mechanisms? What does healthy communication look like? What is codependence? What is the right way to assert your psychological boundaries? I honestly believe that knowing this stuff is essential if you want to have healthy relationships. It's why I talk about them on my channel. And so if you're watching this video, you watch my content, then that's awesome. You've already made a really great start. But the thing is that a lot of this is just not gender specific. It's not like women are the only ones that can be codependent. It's not like only women can grow up in a household where they didn't have their emotional needs met and their parents didn't model for them what a healthy relationship looks like. But I think it's because of the universality of this stuff that can make conversations about this a little bit uncomfortable. Like, I think the smart, self-aware people who watch my channel have already picked up on this, that a lot of the things that I talk about when it comes to individual psychology aren't just applicable to women. These lessons can also be applied to themselves as men. If I'm talking about the characteristics of a high-quality woman, she's got to be intelligent, self-aware, interested in self-growth, then it's quite natural, to extrapolate from that, like, okay, well, if I want that in a partner, I need to have these things for myself. But that can make some of this content a little bit confronting because it shines the spotlight back on you, and it's so much easier to watch content that is simply criticizing others. We can spend all day focusing on the other people and blaming them for their shortcomings. It's a lot harder to look at a mirror and actually focus on our own shortcomings and focus on our own self-growth. If you are one of those rare individuals who is passionate about understanding women, but equally passionate about understanding yourself, then you are exactly the kind of audience member that I want to attract to this channel. You are so welcome here. Are you ready? Because this is the biggest secret to all of this stuff. The deeper you understand yourself, the deeper you're going to be able to understand women. Understanding your own insecurities is going to give you insight into the insecurities experienced by everybody else, including women. Getting in touch with your own masculinity is going to help you understand femininity, and specifically why the feminine responds to the masculine. The deeper that you go inside your own psychology and understand yourself, the more able you're going to be to understand everybody else. That's the real truth to it. That's the key. Understanding other human beings is easy when you understand yourself, but it's difficult, it's painful. In order to do that, you have to confront some of your deeper fears. You have to really go there, to show courage, to be vulnerable, and that's difficult. But if you're up for that kind of challenge, if that excites you, then I'm so glad that you found my channel. I'm so glad that we're taking this journey together. I know that there's this stereotype that men are the ones who are always scared of commitment, but if you've actually been paying attention, you'll notice that men are often really keen to lock women down. It's actually women who can be a little bit more difficult to get into a relationship. And why is that? Why can women be scared of commitment? What's the reason? Anyway, it's my latest Patreon video. I go through 5 different reasons why a woman might not want to commit to a man. If this is something that interests you, go and sign up on my Patreon. It's just a $5 a month subscription. You get instant access to a whole bunch of exclusive content. It's a wonderful way to support the channel. I'd love to see you over there.